You can feel it everywhere now, in the quiet moments men never used to question, in the way he sits alone after work staring at nothing, in the way he hesitates before answering messages, in the way he listens more than he speaks, not because he's confused, but because something inside him has finally shifted. Men aren't angry, they aren't bitter, they aren't defeated. They're waking up to the uncomfortable gap between what they were promised and what they've lived. For years they tried to be what society demanded, supportive, patient, unshakable, endlessly understanding. But as expectations rose while appreciation vanished, as loyalty became optional while their effort remained mandatory, as intimacy turned conditional and accountability evaporated, the illusion cracked. Quietly, without drama, men began to see modern relationships for what they've become, not what they were told they were. And now millions are stepping back, not out of resentment, but out of clarity. The truth they're waking up to isn't loud or dramatic. It's cold, simple, and undeniable. The cost of staying blind has become higher than the cost of finally seeing. Men didn't start waking up because of one viral video or one bad relationship. They woke up because over time, the illusion surrounding modern womanhood began to crack. Not loudly, but quietly, in subtle moments that were impossible to ignore. He began to notice that the expectations placed on him kept rising, while the expectations placed on her kept shrinking. He began to see that many modern women demanded traditional loyalty while offering modern freedom, expected emotional security while providing emotional volatility, and wanted unconditional male investment while refusing to be held to any standard themselves. At first, he dismissed it. He told himself he was overthinking, being harsh, or misunderstanding the situation. But the patterns repeated, in dating, in relationships, in society, in everyday interactions. He realized he could be judged for things he never did, blamed for phalanx he didn't cause, and criticized for standards he didn't choose. Meanwhile, her own standards were treated as empowerment. Her own flaws were reframed as trauma. Her accountability was optional, but his was mandatory. This imbalance didn't make him angry, it made him aware. Men began noticing how often modern women spoke of independence while craving dependence, demanded emotional support without providing emotional safety, and expected masculine strength while punishing masculine truth. The contradiction was everywhere once he learned how to see it. And this realization didn't harden him, it humbled him. Because for the first time he understood that the modern dating landscape isn't broken accidentally, it's broken by design. He is told to give endlessly, yet is shamed for wanting anything in return. He is told to understand her feelings, yet his own feelings are treated as threats. He is told to be the provider, protector, stabilizer, yet is told he is oppressive if he fulfills those roles too well. The awakening began when he recognized that the rules he was following were designed for him to lose, and once a man sees the system clearly, he cannot unsee it. The second truth men are waking up to is even harder to swallow. Modern relationships often operate without reciprocity. He noticed it gradually, the way his effort was assumed, his consistency taken for granted, his sacrifices treated as baseline obligations rather than acts of love. Meanwhile, her contributions, no matter how small, were celebrated as extraordinary. She could cancel plans without consequence, withdraw affection without explanation, or shift expectations overnight, and he was expected to adapt instantly with empathy and patience. But when he needed the same understanding, the same grace, the same emotional space, he was told he was being distant, dramatic, or emotionally unavailable. The scoreboard was invisible, but the imbalance was undeniable. A man can carry weight without complaint, but he cannot carry a relationship alone. Over time, he realized that many modern women were taught to receive but never taught to give back. They were raised on slogans of empowerment but not on the discipline of partnership. They learned to demand standards but not to meet them. They were told what they deserve, but rarely what they must provide. So men watched as the relationships became extraction points. Their time, their stability, their emotional labor poured out endlessly into someone who believed appreciation was optional. And the moment he asked for something in return, effort, loyalty, accountability, peace, it was treated as controlling or unfair. That's when the awakening sharpened. He realized he wasn't being loved for who he was, but for what he provided. And that kind of love has an expiration date. Men aren't withdrawing because they hate women. They're withdrawing because they finally understand the price of one-sided devotion. A relationship without reciprocity isn't partnership, it's servitude dressed as romance. and modern men are choosing to walk away from the burden of carrying both sides alone. The third truth men are waking up to is the emotional double standard that governs modern relationships. It's the quiet rule no one admits aloud. Her emotions are valid, his emotions are inconvenient. A woman can cry, rage, withdraw, demand space, demand closeness, demand reassurance, all under the banner of emotional expression. But when a man finally reaches his breaking point, when frustration or sadness or overwhelm rises in him, he's told he's being cold, distant, shut down, or uninvested. His emotions are seen not as signals of stress or unmet needs, but as malfunctions to be corrected. And so he learned early. Her feelings require response, his require suppression. He learned to regulate her storms while hiding his own. He learned to walk gently through her triggers while swallowing the ones she creates in him. Over time, he realized he had become the emotional foundation of the relationship without ever being allowed to lean on it himself. The moment he opened up, she felt attacked. The moment he expressed discomfort, she felt criticized. The moment he admitted vulnerability, she felt insecure. And eventually he discovered the truth. He wasn't allowed emotional freedom. He was only allowed emotional responsibility. Modern women often describe men as emotionally unavailable without understanding that unavailability is learned, not inherent. A man who is punished for expressing emotion will eventually stop expressing anything at all. But this time, men aren't blaming themselves for shutting down. They're waking up to the reality that emotional intimacy cannot exist in an environment where only one person's feelings are permitted. He doesn't want to be stoic and distant. He wants to be Steve. He doesn't want to be ebullient, he wants to be heard to. But when his emotional world is treated as a threat rather than a truth, withdrawal becomes survival, and now men are refusing to carry the emotional burden alone. They're done being responsible for both hearts in the relationship while having no permission to protect their own. The fourth truth men are waking up to is the slow disappearance of accountability in modern relationships, not on their side, but on hers. For years, he accepted every conflict as his responsibility. If she was upset, he must have done something wrong. If she felt insecure, he must not be doing enough. If she felt disconnected, he must have changed. At first, he accepted this role because men are conditioned to take blame as a form of leadership, but over time, he began to notice the pattern. No matter what happened, the responsibility was always his, never shared. She could lash out in anger and call it stress. She could withdraw affection and call it self-care. She could disrespect him and call it honesty. But the moment he reacted, even gently, the spotlight shifted to him as the problem. And slowly he realized that he was living inside a system where his flaws were magnified and hers were excused, where his mistakes defined him and hers were treated as emotional moments he should understand, where he apologized to keep the peace while she apologized only when consequences became unavoidable. Men aren't waking up because they expect perfection. They're waking up because they finally understand that accountability is not a gendered responsibility, it's a relational one. When a woman refuses to own her patterns, her words, her reactions, her choices, the relationship becomes a rigged game he can never win. He noticed how often communication meant her talking and him accepting fault. How often working on the relationship meant him changing while she stayed exactly the same. How often growth meant him sacrificing parts of himself so she wouldn't feel uncomfortable. The truth that hit him hardest wasn't that she failed, it was that she felt entitled to fail without consequence. Accountability is the backbone of partnership, and when it's missing, respect rots and connection collapses. Men aren't leaving because they're fragile, they're leaving because they refuse to carry the weight of two people's shortcomings alone. One of the most alarming truths men are waking up to isn't about women themselves, it's about the expectation system modern relationships now operate under. A system where men feel they must constantly adapt to emotional climates that shift without warning. He noticed it slowly, how the rules changed week to week, how the definition of being a good partner moved like a mirage he could never quite reach. At first, he thought he was slipping. He tried harder, listened more, softened where he once stood firm, spoke carefully, moved gently, carried conversations with precision, because one wrong tone could unravel the entire evening. But the more he adjusted, the more the expectations expanded. What made her feel secure yesterday wasn't enough today. What reassured her last month barely registered now. Stability, the thing he believed relationships were built on, began to feel like a test he could never pass. And somewhere inside him, a quiet truth emerged. Constant emotional recalibration is not connection, it's exhaustion. This wasn't about blame, it wasn't about fault. It was about the pressure many people now feel to be everything at once, emotionally intuitive, endlessly patient, always available, always attuned. Expectations rise with culture's demands, but communication hasn't risen alongside them. So two people begin dancing around each other, misreading signals, negotiating boundaries that aren't stowy, and hoping the next version of themselves is finally the one that works. Men aren't waking up because they resent these expectations. They're waking up because they finally recognize the toll. When every day requires emotional armor, strategic language, and psychological endurance, connection begins to feel like a performance instead of a partnership. And no one, not men, not women, can thrive in a relationship where the target keeps moving and neither person stops long enough to ask why. What men are waking up to now is something they didn't even have the language for before: the disappearance of emotional safety inside modern relationships. Not because anyone intends harm, but because the pace and pressure of today's world leave very little room for calm, grounded connection. He began to notice how every attempt at honesty required calculation, how simple truths had to be softened, edited, rephrased, not to deceive but to avoid tension, how expressing frustration, fatigue, or uncertainty carried the risk of igniting an argument instead of creating understanding. Over time, he realized that he wasn't sharing his inner world anymore. He was managing it. He was filtering himself, shrinking himself, diluting himself to keep the relationship stable. And while she might have believed they were communicating more, what they were actually doing was negotiating emotional minefields. This isn't a failure of women. It's a failure of the culture both partners are drowning in. A culture of instant reactions, a culture of heightened sensitivity, a culture where disagreement feels like disrespect and vulnerability feels like weakness. Emotional safety is the first thing a relationship needs and the last thing people talk about. It's the invisible space where two people can tell the truth without punishment. But when that space collapses, something inside him collapses with it. He stops sharing because sharing now feels dangerous. He stops expressing because expression now feels explosive. And slowly, he retreats into a quieter version of himself, not because he's shutting her out, but because he's trying to protect what remains of his peace. Men aren't waking up because they fear emotional intimacy. They're waking up because they're realizing how rare emotional safety has become. Without it, even love becomes heavy. And once a man realizes he's safer in his own silence than in the space he once shared with someone he loved, emotional distance becomes not a choice, but a necessity. Another truth men are waking up to is the widening gap between what people say they want in relationships and how they actually behave inside them. He started to notice how often he heard phrases like, "I want communication, I want partnership, I want teamwork," yet the reality rarely matched the words. Conversations meant for clarity turned into debates. Requests for support turned into judgments. Promises of teamwork slipped into silent expectations that he would carry the heavier load. And slowly he realizes that many relationships today operate on idealistic language but inconsistent actions. She might say she wants stability yet react emotionally to every small disruption. She might say she wants honesty yet become defensive when hearing a truth that doesn't flatter her. She might say she wants partnership yet default to patterns where one person, usually him, manages the emotional climate while the other manages only her reactions. This isn't deceit, it's confusion. Most people genuinely believe they want mature love, but haven't yet developed the emotional tools needed to sustain it. Men began noticing that relationships often followed a script of good intentions paired with unstable execution. Words painted a vision of harmony, but actions maintained cycles of tension, and he felt the mismatch growing. The more he invested, the more he felt he was trying to build something alone. The more he communicated, the more he found himself talking into emotional crosswinds. The more he tried to repair, the more temporary the peace became. Eventually he realized something quietly devastating. Consistency isn't love's accessory, it's love's foundation. Without it, even sincerity becomes unreliable. Men aren't waking up because they've lost faith in connection. They're waking up because they're seeing how often modern relationships rely on emotional promises instead of emotional practice. And when words stop aligning with behavior, a man stops believing the words, not out of cynicism, but out of experience. Disconnection doesn't begin with conflict, it begins with inconsistency, and once he sees that pattern clearly, he can never unsee it again. The most alarming truth men are waking up to is painfully simple. Peace has become the rarest commodity in modern relationships, Not affection, not intimacy, not companionship. Peace. The quiet sense that he can breathe, exist, and speak without stepping into emotional turbulence. He didn't notice the shift at first. He told himself that the tension was temporary, that the arguments were just phases, that the emotional spikes would level out. But over time, something inside him began to track a deeper pattern. Not the conflict itself, but the absence of calm. He realized that every vulnerable moment could turn into misunderstanding. Every honest question could spark defensiveness. And every attempt at resolution could reopen old wounds. The relationship became a loop of emotional negotiations, strategic conversations, and careful timing. Even love felt like something he had to navigate rather than experience. Eventually, he found himself relaxing more in silence than in connection. He felt more grounded alone than together. He noticed how his shoulders dropped the moment he stepped outside, how his mind quieted when he wasn't decoding someone else's reactions, how his mood stabilized when he didn't have to manage anyone else's emotional temperature. That was the moment everything changed. Because once a man experiences genuine peace, even accidentally, even briefly, he becomes aware of how little he has felt it inside the relationship. And once he recognizes that truth, he can't go back to pretending. This awakening isn't rejection. It isn't bitterness. It's a man realizing that emotional noise has become the norm and silence has become the sanctuary. He's not choosing solitude because he hates connection. He's choosing it because it's the first place he's felt like himself in years. Peace is not a luxury for men. It's oxygen. And once he remembers what it feels like to breathe freely, he stops accepting relationships where he constantly feels out of air. The final truth men are waking up to isn't explosive. It's eerily calm. It's the realization that emotional disconnection doesn't happen when he stops loving her. It happens when he stops recognizing himself in the relationship. There comes a moment, usually late at night, when he sits alone, maybe at the edge of the bed, maybe in his car before walking inside, and asks a question he's avoided for years. Why do I feel more alone with someone than I do by myself? It's not a dramatic moment. No shouting, no accusations, no final straw. It's a quiet acknowledgement that the relationship has slowly turned him into a version of himself he doesn't want to be. Cautious, muted, defensive, drained. He remembers the man he was before the constant tension, before the emotional negotiations, before the silent battles no one else could see. And he realizes he misses that man. He realizes that somewhere between trying to be supportive, trying to avoid conflict, trying to stay strong, he lost pieces of himself, his humor, his edge, his calm, his confidence. That's when he understands the most sobering truth of all: staying costs him more of himself than leaving ever will. And once a man understands that, emotional withdrawal becomes inevitable. Not out of revenge, not out of spite, but out of self-preservation. He stops arguing because arguments no longer matter. He stops explaining because explanations no longer change anything. He stops trying to be understood because he finally accepts that understanding isn't coming. To her, it looks sudden, as if he woke up one day and detached. But to him, this ending began long before the first silence, long before the first distance. It began the moment he realized he was fighting alone for a relationship that no longer fought for him. Men don't walk away loudly. They walk away emotionally first, quietly, cleanly, completely, and long before their body ever follows. And by the time he leaves in the physical world, he's already gone in every other one. In the end, the awakening men are experiencing isn't really about modern women at all. It's about the moment a man finally hears the sound of his own soul again after years of living in emotional noise. He realizes he's spent so much time trying to be understood that he forgot what it feels like to live with clarity. He spent so much time trying to maintain connection that he lost connection with himself. This isn't a story of blame, it's a story of imbalance, a story of two people shaped by a culture that rewards sensitivity without teaching stability, that encourages emotional expression without teaching emotional responsibility, that pushes independence without teaching interdependence. And somewhere inside that chaos, men simply reached a breaking point where silence felt healthier than negotiation, where space felt safer than closeness, where choosing themselves felt more honest than trying to hold together something that was already falling apart. Men aren't walking away from relationships because they no longer believe in love. They're walking away because they're finally recognizing the cost of losing themselves inside relationships that never gave them room to breathe. And once a man returns to himself, to his peace, his center, his truth, he doesn't come back the same. He comes back steadier, clearer, quieter, and unwilling to live in emotional environments that demand his strength but cannot hold his vulnerability. Recognizing the truth is the first step. Rebuilding yourself is the next.